Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Friday, July the 21st. And welcome to our Texas Political Report with our good friend George Rodriguez from South Texas, where I'm sure you're freezing to death, George. I mean, I'm sure
Yes,
it's cold.
it was down. It was all the way down to 90 degrees this morning at 4 o'clock.
Isn't that amazing?
It is 105 right now.
Yeah, well, I think it's 100 and it's 100 here, maybe plus a couple more. But I think it's supposed to end next week. Am I right? Is this
Yeah, that's what they said.
Yeah.
The additional problem that we've got is the Sahara dust. I don't know if you're suffering, but my headache was my sinus headache was killing me this morning.
Oh, okay. Allergies, you mean?
Yeah, allergies.
Yeah, allergies. Okay. No, that hasn't hit me yet, but I know that it's just been uncomfortably warm to go outside. I mean, it's just been, going outside, you really have to want to
Getting in a vehicle.
Yeah, you have to want to really go out for a walk. I do it very early in the morning, but right now, late afternoon, early evening, it's usually the hottest time of the day. Well, we've got three reports, George, that we're going to get into today, or three stories. The first one is sanctuary cities in New York City, I guess they don't have them anymore. Lopez-Obrador, president of Mexico, taking the governor of Texas to task, in a pretty interesting way. And then, of course, the Department of Justice threatening, and I don't know if they've actually done it, but threatening to sue Texas over these barriers. So let's get started with the sanctuary city situation in New York. This is hilarious when you look at it, because these are the same people, of course, who criticized Texas. Remember when we had our debate over sanctuary cities back in 2017? And they're the same people who used to criticize Texas for not wanting to have sanctuary cities. And now the tables have turned. But what's interesting is that New York City is trying to have it both ways. They're saying, well, we still believe in sanctuary cities, but we don't want you to come. So they're literally sending out notices to people saying, don't come to New York. And the situation in New York, George, is quite interesting, because it's strictly a money problem. They just don't have the money. They've overextended themselves and they don't have the money. They don't really have the space. And many of the surrounding communities are basically saying, no, we don't want them either. So the mayor of New York is in it's a very I kind of feel sorry for him, but on the other hand, I don't, because they created this. They're the ones who created this. Now they got to live with it, George.
Yeah, the situation is it is comical. It's ironical. It's really ridiculous. It's all of those things. This is a socialist state in the United States, within the United States, that is collapsing. And it shows how bad socialism is. The government of New York has been trying to do everything for everyone, including dispensing needles, including letting folks off for minor offenses, as they say, providing them legal assistance. Just doing all sorts of things, renting, freezing rents, all sorts of things. Now come all of these folks who want part of the American dream as defined by New York liberals. And, they're freaking out. They don't know what to do with all these folks. We've had the situation where, they have been placed in great hotels, and destroyed the hotels, and folks are criticizing the New York government for putting them up in these nice hotels.
Right. Well, what's interesting is that the economics of New York, the government of New York just found out that their state revenues are down 20%.
Correct.
Meaning the taxes are down 20%. And that is, that's a combination of
people and businesses are leaving.
Well, that's the big problem. And in the case of New York City, I remember reading one time that 8% of the taxpayers in New York City pay like 90% of the taxes. So they have been relying on a very small group of very wealthy people, or at least well-to-do people. And, they lose one of these folks and they got a real problem.
It has an impact.
It has an impact. because they've had a lot of people. When 8% is paying 90% of your taxes, then the other 90% are paying 10%. That's a real problem. And of course, there's a lot of things going on in New York. You've got the crime problem. You've got the safety problem. I mean, just a lot of unfortunate things going on in New York City. A lot of the buildings that used to be filled with office workers are not anymore. A lot of people are working from home.
Crime.
So it's crime. And so it's kind of like a perfect storm of things that have happened in New York. But, they were very eager to adopt the sanctuary city flag.
Correct.
And now they're basically saying, well, no, not here. Don't bring your people here.
The suburbs of New York City are rebelling as well, because let's remember that they've tried to shuttle them out into the surrounding counties, and the counties themselves have said no. So they've created this problem, and they're going to have to live with it. But of course, they're making excuses. They're blaming Governor Abbott. They're blaming Republicans for not opening the borders more. It's everybody's fault except their own.
Right. And the governor of New York, of course, the mayor of New York City is calling for immigration reform. But again, when I hear stuff like that, I always like to remind
their
people
definition of immigration reform.
But when I hear about immigration reform, that's not going to solve this problem.
No.
Immigration reform.
The best solution that they have is more money. They want more money.
That's the other thing, and they're not going to get any. They're not going to get any new money from this house, and frankly, from the federal government. They're not. One of the things that we're also seeing, George, is a lot of these cities were able to use a lot of the COVID money,
correct,
to maintain a lot of these things. And now that there is no COVID money anymore, and they don't have their own money, that's also part of their problem here. And it's a mess. It's a mess.
They don't know how to stop spending. That's the problem. They don't know how to stop spending and go back to what it was. No, they've hooked themselves on these programs. They've hooked themselves on providing these services. Now, what are they going to do?
Well, what they're going to do is what they're doing, which is there's literally printing flyers saying "Don't come to New York," which is hilarious. And I'm sure that the other cities are having the same issue too. But I always laugh at New York, because New York is a city of 8 million people, and if they cannot handle 40 or 50,000 migrants,
how's the rest of exactly?
How is Del Rio supposed to handle thousands? Del Rio on the border, or even El Paso, how are they supposed to handle them? They're smaller cities with a lot of resources. So it's their own problem. They created this, and now they got to live with it. And my guess is that most of the immigration activists are going to get pretty angry at the mayor for having to reverse course. And I'm just wondering, George, if they're going to call him a racist, because he wants to shut down sanctuary cities.
I'm sure they will. At some point, these tribes, and that's what they are, these tribes will turn on each other. This is the headache that we've got, is that rather than identifying as Americans, they identify by their own ethnicity, racial group, class group, et cetera, et cetera. And where does it end? I remember working in the Justice Department when I was in the Reagan administration, and seeing clashes, reading about clashes in high schools between Hispanics and Blacks. And that was, while everybody was trying to portray, well, they still do, try to portray some type of minority unity. That's ideal. But if you emphasize ethnicity, race, class, et cetera, that's where the people turn to him.
Right. Well, also, in the case of many African Americans, they're asking the obvious question. We see this in Chicago. They're asking the obvious question, and that is, why are you taking my resources and giving it to people who are not even from here?
Exactly.
That was one of the big demonstrations they had in Chicago, and saying, hey, you're taking our resources, you're denying our resources and giving it to people. And it's just, but they created this mess,
They've
like you're
created
saying.
this mess.
They
They've
create,
created this tribalism. They have
yeah,
created this dissension, and they've encouraged dissension. Now, they've remodeled the house. They don't want to live in it.
right. No, that's exactly right. Well, let's move to another topic here, which is rather controversial, and that's the president of Mexico really going after the governor of Texas. And I guess the main issue is these barriers on the river. Now, I've only seen pictures of them or some videos, but what they look like big barrels. That's kind of what they look like, and they're sort of connected, I guess, one to another. And I believe the objective of these, I don't even know what they're called. Are they called barriers? Well, I don't even know what they're called.
They call them bollards.
Okay. I don't even, as far as I can tell from the video or the picture, they're not really impacting the river. I mean, the flow of water is still going on, and the fish, I assume, are swimming underneath. They're not protesting that anybody's denying them their space. It is primarily an instrument being put strategically on the river to keep people from swimming over. Correct. Now, I suppose if you look at the barrier, you can still jump over it, but it's more complicated than what it's been before. The governor of Texas put these in. The president of Mexico is accusing our governor of being anti-immigrant, which is kind of funny. And then, of course, the Department of Justice tying into this story, the Department of Justice is threatening to sue Texas. So poor Governor Abbott, who knew that he was going to be the target of so many attacks, George?
I think a lot of us, including myself, who have been advising and encouraging the governor's office, our state reps, that something needed to be done. A lot of us recognized that if something was done, there was going to be a backlash. And that's what we've got. If you have just over the past week, it's been, and I, at least to me, it's been a very obvious coordinated media effort of calling out Texas regarding the barriers. We have seen it in virtually every newspaper, news media. CBS ran something. CNN definitely has run something on it. All of them, all of a sudden, erupted angrily about the barrier. And, these bollards do not impact on the environment of the water. You're right. What they do is they float on top of the water, and they make it more difficult for someone to swim across, for you to float across in a barge or a inner tube or something. It makes it much more difficult. In fact, the person that has brought a lawsuit, that has filed a lawsuit against the state and Governor Abbott, is someone who is a kayaker. They have filed a lawsuit because now all of a sudden they can't kayak down the Rio Grande. I'm not sure where people actually kayak, because I haven't seen it that much. But this is the anger that they've got. The other anger, of course, has been the wire, the concertina wire that's on once you reach the embankment, that you have seen in many places. Many places don't have it, but a lot of the places do have the concertina wire that keeps people on the banks. It doesn't let them come in anymore. And that has also been an issue. You've heard about the inhumane treatment, that people are not able to get water. People are not able to come in to get assistance, medical assistance, et cetera, et cetera. Again, the medical assistance, you can get it in Mexico. It's going to be more difficult, but you can get it in Mexico. The water you can certainly get in Mexico. You can get nonprofits, instead of waiting for them on this side, could easily go to the other side and provide all sorts of services. But the battle is nothing more than people griping that they cannot reach the interior of the United States easier now. And I, for one, People say that the governor has not done enough to stop the flow of drugs and illegal aliens. Well, I got news for you. If he isn't doing enough, then they wouldn't be screaming and yelling like they are right now.
Well, that's exactly right. And I think that what I find most interesting about these barriers is that I don't know what side is Texas and what side is Mexico on the river, but you can kind of tell that the barriers are more on the Texas side. But when I look at the pictures and I hear the complaints that this is a threat to the environment, that this is a threat to humanity. Well, first of all, I don't understand the environmental issue because, again, the water is flowing.
It's not hurting. It's not hurting.
And the fish is, going underneath. And not, again, it seems to be, like you say, it's simply a barrier to keep people from coming
Does the
over.
Does the United States have the right to protect its borders and its citizens? That's the bottom line.
That's right. Now, the real, the question that I keep asking myself is that those who are complaining about humanitarian conditions, what could be more unhumanitarian than to bring people over the way they're being brought over, where they have to pay, where they have to basically, be brought over here by criminal elements. I mean, we have two very serious problems that I see on the border. One is the drugs, of course, that are coming, and the other one is the human traffic. And the drugs, well, that's more complicated because the reality is that we're consuming it, and that's a more complicated issue. But the human trafficking is an absolutely horrible thing, and both moving drugs and moving humans have become very lucrative businesses for these, what they like to call organized crime.
Correct.
In Mexico, they call it, crimen organizado, organized crime. And I don't know. I don't see the Mexican government doing anything to stop this. I mean, you got the president of Mexico attacking the governor of Texas. Well, why doesn't he do something?
Exactly.
The president of Mexico could shut down the human traffic tomorrow morning. He could simply say,
if they want people to stop suffering at the border, then they could easily stop it in Tapachula. They could easily stop. And on our side, we could stop letting people in. I guarantee that when we stop providing easy access into the United States, the flow stops. We saw it under Trump. We saw it under Reagan. It's the fact. It is the fact. When you take a strong measure to discourage, I'll use that word, illegal immigration, it works.
Right. I think under Bush at one time he put troops, I think, on the border as well. Yeah, and that had an impact. But I can certainly understand the humanitarian argument, but I think they're basically they're screaming at the wrong guy.
Exactly.
They should be screaming at Mexico, and for Mexico to put on this posture, to criticize the governor of Texas. Do you remember George when Hugo Chavez came to the UN back in 2006, and he made some very critical comments about President Bush in the UN itself.
Right.
And the very next day, the Democrat representative in that, wherever the UN is, the Democrat representative in that district came out and said, "Hey, I may disagree with President Bush, but you don't come, speaking to Hugo Chavez, you don't come into my country and criticize my president. You don't do that. And that's not something that I want you to do. And I'm going to defend the president because he's my president." And that's what you don't see here from Democrats. Why aren't Democrats calling on Lopez-Obrador to worry about Mexico and not go after?
It is extreme anti-Americanism. And I you can't define it as anything else. It is more against, it is politics that is directed at the country and at our values and our way of life, and it's it's no longer how we can stay free and independent and strong either a Democrat approach or a Republican approach. No, now it's just it's pure globalism, and
Right.
I it's really sad.
No, it's sad and it's sickening because this would be a great opportunity, just like that congressman. I think Randall was his name, Randall or whatever it was in New York. And again, he was a hyper Democrat. He was a partisan Democrat. He criticized President Bush a lot. But when somebody came into his district to criticize the president of the United States, he stood with the president of the United States. I think his last name was Randall,
Randall.
Randall, yeah, if I remember.
No, Rangel.
Rangel, yeah. And
Actually, it was Rangel.
Right.
He was of Dominican. I think his grandparents were Dominican.
Oh, okay. All right. But he was, and I remember I used to watch him on TV. He's kind of a friendly guy, very funny kind of guy. But, he was an anti-Bush Democrat, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But when it came to Hugo Chavez coming here and criticizing the president, he stood with his president, which is something that I would love to see now. I would love to see some Democrats publicly.
And I just can't see. I can't see the squad, for example.
No, that. Right. But I mean, why isn't there a Democrat, for example, the two men who are running for the U.S. Senate? Why isn't one of them standing up saying, look, we can disagree about politics, but, the president of Mexico has no business telling the people of Texas how to vote. I mean, that's not something that he should be doing. And yet they don't, George. And you have to wonder, is it an anti-Americanism, or are they just scared to death of the immigration activists? Because if you think about those two men running for the Senate nomination, Gonzalez, I think, Gutierrez. And Adler, if you think about those two men, if they got into a problem with the immigration activists, that's the end of their campaign.
That's the end of their campaign. Because they are so dependent on these leftists. The left has taken over the Democratic Party, and the left is not pro-American. That's
and they're not very nice. They'll come after you. They will come after you with all guns, and they will go after you. But this is, I think, a good example for somebody to stand up for the country. Yeah. That's what I like to see here is a Democrat, a major Democrat, come out and say, hey, look, the president of Mexico has no business telling people in the United States how to vote any more than an American politician.
Imagine if we went over there and did that. Are you kidding?
No, yes, that would be.
My gosh.
That's right. Now, the other issue, of course, is that the Department of Justice wants to go after Texas over these barriers.
Oh, yeah.
But on what ground? Now, I thought it was interesting because Governor Abbott today came right out and said, we'll see you in court. So I guess that their argument is going to be, I'd like to get your reaction to this, George, but I think the argument that Texas is going to make is, hey, look, we understand that the border is a federal responsibility.
But you're not doing it.
But you're not doing it, so we got to do something on our own. I think that's going to be their argument, George. What do you think?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the border is out of control. And the impact on private property, the impact on private citizens, the fentanyl, the impact of there was another car wreck in a small community just south of San Antonio. There was a car that was the result of a car chase of a smuggler. All of these things are impacting on us, and they are a direct result of this border being wide open. And it's got to be controlled. Doesn't have to be shut down, but it's got to be controlled.
Right. And there's another impact also, George, that nobody ever talks about. And that is the impact that this is having on Mexico. Because a lot of the border towns on the Mexico side are being seriously impacted by this.
Gosh, yes.
Particularly the organized crime. So, they're taking it down there as well. So you have to wonder, what's going on in Mexico, that the president of Mexico feels like getting into an argument with the governor of Texas, but yet there's a lot of problems, particularly the violence in his country, that he's basically not talking about, George.
Correct. These liberal policies, both in Mexico and in the United States, are leading to the destabilization of society, of the destabilization of the Mexican government, and it's certainly having a terrible impact on U.S. local governments. Right. That's the bottom line to this thing, and it needs to be addressed. I mean, It needs to be addressed as a security issue.
Right.
Because
that's exactly right.
Because the shootings, the kidnappings, all of those things that are happening in Mexico can easily start happening over here, and will start happening over here. Everyone knows in the law enforcement community that I've spoken to that connections between the cartels and the Mexican gangs in prison are already being made, and everybody knows that the Mexican prison gangs are the ones that control the street gangs. So it is we're looking at a perfect storm when it comes to law and order, and because of the defund the police as well. So what we need to do, Americans need to address this issue from a national security point of view.
Right. Well, that's it. I mean, the border should always be addressed as a national security issue. Obviously, it's economics as well. There's a lot of trade going back and forth. This week, we saw some new figures that Mexico is now the #1 trading partner for the United States, and in fact, taken over that from China. More and more business is being done with Mexico, and that's a good thing because that's good for Texas as well. But all of this criminal activity on the border is threatening that. It's threatening that because these businesses that exist on the border, I mean, I hear things from the Mexican side. I was talking to a lady last night who told me that she used to drive to Mexico. She won't do it anymore.
Yeah,
simply because
I certainly won't.
It's unsafe. I mean, you're driving in the middle of a country road and they stop, they take your car from you, and then they leave you standing there. Correct. And you're stuck in the middle of nowhere with your family, and you can't do anything about it because the police is
if they don't take one of your family members as a kidnap.
Well, sure. And so that's another. So all of this is happening south of the border. The violence is growing significantly, and I think it's a huge threat, like you say, to the Mexican state. And I just see Governor Abbott, and I see a man who's trying to deal with the problem. He's got limited options, but I think he's using them as well as anybody could use them, George.
I agree. I think he's doing the best he can with the tools that he's got. The other problem that we've got is that we've got problems. We've got folks within the Republican Party on one side who do not want any kind of restrictions on trade, and that's understandable. But then you've got other folks on the other side who are hypercritical of the governor not doing enough. Well, we've got to find a way to address both issues in some form or fashion, because for the next 2 years, we've got another 2 years with this administration. They're not going to lift a finger, and right. I guarantee that even if there is a Republican that starts to look like they're going to win and starts gathering steam, they will do even more to make the border more open.
To take advantage of the situation because of the upcoming change. So I think right now the ball is, if it gets to the Supreme Court, I'm not sure how the situation works out. I mean, I assume it'll start at a appeals court and then eventually get to the Supreme Court.
It's going to start the local court, I'm sure.
Yeah, and one of the federal courts.
The main proponent right now that has brought it, the first one that I know of, is a gentleman, and he's arguing on behalf of environmental issues, that it's impacting on the environment, as well as that it is impacting on his freedom to have recreation. Right. So that's, we'll see how far that goes and how much the Justice Department can push it.
Well, the Justice Department will argue, like we said before, they will argue that this is a federal issue.
Yeah.
And in theory, it is. Theoretically, it is. But if the federal government is not doing its part, then, I think Texas has the right, and I think Texas will argue that they have the right to defend themselves under the Texas Constitution and the American Constitution. And it's going to be an interesting argument, because I don't think that's ever, to my knowledge, ever been framed in that way before the Supreme Court. I don't remember any time in American history where that ever got to the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court could do everybody a big favor I think, by cleaning this up and saying, if you're not going to do it, then Texas has the right to do it. Hopefully that's where they come down. Given the conservative nature of this court, I wouldn't be surprised if that's how they come down, George.
Well, we've got to remember that recently the conservative court, did determine that the issue of what to do about the border was the lawsuit that was brought by Paxton about the impact of the policies, the liberal policies, and how it was impacting on the state of Texas. They referred it back to the state.
Right.
So at this point, I see that as an opening for the governor to win.
Right.
That
no, I think the governor has,
and the governor, it's returned because it's a state issue. Okay, so the
Right.
state is going to do something about it.
I think the governor has a good hand to play here.
I do too.
And I think he's got to make the case that, hey, look, the theory is the theory, but I got to deal with the issue. And look at, and any reasonable person looking at the border situation, I don't see how you can look at the border situation and not conclude that it's a mess. I thought it was interesting. Maybe you saw this video. Did you see the video of Robert F. Kennedy going down to the border?
Yes.
I guess about 2 or 3 weeks ago, he went down and he stood there with a video machine. And he was sitting there saying, the time that I've been here, I've seen all these people come. Some come in without restrictions.
Without a ticket.
Others come in and they give him a ticket. And he basically said, this is unsustainable. And he's a Democrat running for president. At least he's got
It is not controlled. It is
Right.
not any government, any nation that does not control its borders. It's
a disaster. You cannot have open borders, chaotic borders. I mean, you can have an immigration policy, but it's got to be orderly. There has to be a process that everybody follows that brings people in an orderly fashion. You can't just all rush to the door and hope to get in. That is a recipe for disaster, as we're seeing on the border. Well, George, that just means we got more to talk about the next time we get together. But this lawsuit between Texas and the Biden administration, it's going to be interesting to watch. Another one. It's going to be interesting to watch because Texas has won most of these lawsuits.
Yeah, they have.
Actually, Texas has done well in winning them. Well, George, have a great weekend. I hope that, the Astros and the Rangers have a big series coming up next week. And right now the Rangers are up by 4. So it's going to be interesting. I mean, I know that it's not the end of the season, but it's an important series for the two teams to play. So I'm kind of looking forward to it. It's going to be fun. It'll be at Houston. The series will be in Houston. So I hope we can do better than we did the last time here, George.
I'm hoping to catch one game. I'm hoping to head on over there and catch one game.
Oh, that'd be great. The excitement, I'm sure the crowd is going to be quite into it. But the Astros have had some injuries. Yeah. And that, I think, is impacting why they're not, I believe, in first place. I mean, the Rangers have done a great job, but I think most experts would agree that Houston has a better team on paper. But the injuries have caught up with Houston. Well, have a great weekend, George, and thank you so much as always for joining us. Enjoy the heat and don't get overheated. I don't know what else to say.
Thank you very much.
All right,
have a good one. Take care.
Have a great time. Yes, our good friend George Rodriguez from South Texas. We do this once a week, the Texas Report. Try to talk a little bit about what's going on, but really the big stories right now have to do with the border. A couple of them. One is the president of Mexico going after the governor of Texas. I think it's highly irresponsible. And there should be lots of American politicians of both parties coming out in defense of the governor of Texas. This is not a political issue. When somebody from another country takes a shot at somebody in your country, then it becomes a question of respect for your country. And I would love to see some Democrats defend. They don't have to agree with the governor, but at least defend him from these attacks from the president of another country, in this case, Lopez-Obrador in Mexico. And then, of course, the issue of the border and the Department of Justice going after Texas. I actually feel good about this lawsuit. I think Texas has a good chance of making its point. And if it gets to the Supreme Court, I don't know where exactly. It's going to take a while, probably months, before it gets to the Supreme Court. But something's got to be done about the border. I agree with Robert F. Kennedy. It's unsustainable what we're seeing down there. You simply cannot continue with this craziness down on the border. Thank you for listening. Have a great weekend, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, and we'll talk to you later.